Je pense sans cesse à toi.
Hello and welcome to episode 51 of The Foretop. It's a roundtable discussion of today's hot-button topics in food and beverage. I'm your host, Catherine Cole. On today's show, we will be discussing mental and physical health in the hospitality trade, and we'll focus on the particular stresses of working on the beverage side of the industry. Here in the studios of OPB, I'm joined by Rebecca Hopkins, a wine communication strategist with Folio Fine Wine Partners and founder of the website A Balanced Glass, which promotes healthy lifestyles for members of the wine trade. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you, Kat. It's nice to be here.
And Cathy Huyghe, a journalist who writes for Forbes Online and Inc.com, a contributor to A Balanced Glass and founder of Enalytics.com. Hey, Cathy.
Catherine, so happy to be here.
And Hannah Wallace, a journalist covering food, wine, and agriculture for publications such as Vogue, Civil Eats, and also a semi-regular here on The Foretop. It's so good to see you again, Hannah.
Good to see you, too.
Now for our first course. The suicide of Anthony Bourdain back in June has kickstarted many conversations about mental health in the food and beverage industries. Cathy Huyghe, you recently wrote about this issue for Inc., and we will post a link to that article on our social media feed for our listeners. I wanted to ask you, is there something about the hospitality industry in particular that maybe attracts mental illness or else exacerbates it?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this and talking to some people about this, not least of which is Beck sitting next to me. I think that there's a couple things related to the response. One is the idea of people who are attracted to hospitality, and they're about service. They want to serve other people. They want to be generous. They have sort of this spirit of hospitality in them. So I think that is a component of what draws people to the industry. A second component that I think is maybe more directly related to your question, Catherine, is about adrenaline. And those of us, myself included, absolutely, who thrive on it. And we actually hunt for it and we seek it out. And we definitely sort of get that high. So I think that between those two things, there's definitely some common ground personality-wise among people, certainly that I've worked with in the hospitality industry, in restaurants, especially in kitchens. And the thing is that we are, especially in kitchens and during harvest and for winemakers as well, we're all in the weeds together, and there's a strong rush. There's a rush. We're in the weeds, and there's sort of going through this battle together, and there's that adrenaline that we feed off of every day, and then there needs to be a coming down from that, and there needs to be sort of the other side of that, and I think that is where some of the topics that I hope we'll get into come into play. Things like different kinds of depressions or sort of highs and very extreme highs and lows, the things we use to come down off of it, alcohol, substance abuse, different sorts of things. So I think that the closest comparison for people not in the industry would be people working, as Beck pointed out, as a trader on Wall Street. Kind of that rush of adrenaline, or maybe some other industries. But the hospitality industry, I think, is unique in terms of people who are attracted to that sort of a rush.
I have never thought of it that way. It's almost this bipolar construct that I'm sure would attract people who have a tendency to be that way anyway. That's such an interesting point, Cathy.
I wonder, too, if it has something to do with the fact that, this is Hannah talking, that there's not as much healthcare. Like, people tend to not be covered by health insurance when they're in the hospitality industry. I mean, at least unless they're working for a big company, And so if you do have it may not attract more people with mental illness, but if you do have a mental illness, you don't have the money to see a doctor or to see a therapist.
Yeah, this is Rebecca. I think absolutely the minimum wage side of the industry is a real problem. And also, in the same line as trading is also there's a militaristic brigade attitude that exists in kitchens and exists in cooking. So that forms a natural community that supports each other. And it becomes a way for behavior to be accepted. And so there's a great deal of service, acceptance. We're in this together. We're in the trenches. It's intense. Adrenaline is a huge part of it, but also we accept you how you are and we'll take care of each other. And so I also believe a lot of it doesn't get diagnosed because taking that step either from a financial point of view or stepping out into the world to ask for that help, it takes you out of that comfort zone that you've built, by being constantly in hot, high-pressure environments.
And I think back that to sort of follow up on your point, and Catherine, you're sort of kicked it off with sort of the Anthony Bourdain question. Part of the surprise that shocked so much of us in the industry was how we felt like he didn't reach out to his tribe, and how his suicide stunned the people he was closest, even the people he was closest to. Part of the reaction was how could he not have known how much he meant to people? How could he not have known that? And so that kind of feedback, you would think, would be something that someone who is struggling could reference and be like, you know what, things aren't so bad, like I'm actually doing valuable work. And so the fact that for whatever reason that didn't happen or happen often enough for him, I think really opened up a lot of wounds. It opened up a lot of introspection within the industry, certainly.
Yeah. And Rebecca, I liked what you were saying about it almost being like a wartime situation in a kitchen. The profile that Kim Severson wrote about Sean Brock of Husk and McCrady's in Monero, he's a very well-known chef in South Carolina and Tennessee, was so interesting because he basically, what you said doesn't happen enough. Some of his coworkers and friends got together and did an intervention with him and said, you have an addiction problem. And then he went in for rehab and was diagnosed, according to this article, with post-traumatic stress disorder, not from a single event, but from many events, which basically sort of goes along with what you're saying, Rebecca, that being in a kitchen is almost like being in a war.
Yeah, Catherine, it really, I've spent a little bit of time actually on the hospitality side as I've really started to delve into this subject. And that is probably the most common comment that I've had either from line cooks, sous chefs, head chefs, and the real struggle. And someone who's doing a tremendous job on this is Huyghe Acheson, who really has started to, well, he's working incredibly hard to break down a lot of unconscious habits. The bravado, the machismo, that need to constantly be the tough person in the kitchen that's doing the extra hours and spending the extra time. But it really is a very real emotion. And if you've stood in a kitchen in service, it's a pretty hardcore environment to be in. There's a lot of things happening. It's very high risk for the people that are in those roles, and particularly when we think of the irony of Michelin 3 stars that seem so quiet and accomplished and precisioned, but the amount of work that goes in that back of house to make all of that appear flawless is, high risk, intense, decisions need to be made quickly, and then there are repercussions. Mm-hmm. And so it does tend to drive that. And, Huyghe, I spoke with him in June. I was with him in Aspen Food and Wine, and he said, this is our responsibility as owners, as business leaders and influencers to change and enable people to, feel okay to reach out and ask for help.
Mm-hmm. Cathy, you wrote a piece. I believe you interviewed Tim Haney, who's a recovering alcoholic and also a master of wine. What did you learn from him about being able to ask for help and reach out?
Yeah, Tim was an amazing interview because he was so candid. He was so candid and so articulate about his journey and how it happened. He was very open about the need within the industry. And he was speaking, he had worked as a chef as well as within the wine industry itself. He was speaking about our mutual need for stepping away from the stigmatism and just being able to call somebody out and say, look, I think you have a problem, or let me help you, or let's figure this out. The that was my biggest takeaway from the conversation with Tim, in addition to how candid he is and talking about it so openly. I think provided it was one of the most popular clicked upon articles I've ever written. So I think it really struck a nerve, not only within the industry, but more generally speaking as well. This is somebody at the top of his field who just was admitted he had this problem with his field, basically.
Yeah.
Drinking wine. And so how do you continue on when your big obstacle is what you do?
Yeah. Yeah. And Hannah, you've written about that as well for 750 Daily. I think we talked about it in an earlier episode.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely some overlap there. I don't necessarily think that every alcoholic has mental illness, but certainly there's a lot of self-medicating that goes on in general, but also especially in the alcohol industry. And I same as you, I got so much feedback from that article. I mean, so many people wrote me who I didn't even know had a drinking problem, who were like, "Thank you so much for writing this," and thanked the sort of vicariously the people who talked to me because they were on the record and they were like, "You know what? I'm a former alcoholic and I'm still in the business." Some of them still bartenders who don't drink. And Mickey Baxt was another one, Charleston Grill. He's I think you mentioned him. Yeah, I mean, he's not drinking. He hasn't drunk for 30 years, but he's still a sommelier.
And I think part of the point too is having the courage to speak, but also as writers, having both the platform and the courage of our editors and the support of our editors to put this out there.
Very true. Yeah.
And to really, I mean, kudos to the people who are orchestrating that, because it does, once it's out there, it gives people something to respond to, and which I think is one of the things that is coming out with a balanced glass back. Would you say?
Yeah, I would, Cathy. It's interesting. When I first wrote the Meininger's story, The Challenges of Working with Wine, it was the first time I'd put that thought process to an editor. And I really didn't expect it to go anywhere because it's not a sexy topic and it's not something that people are, it's like they want to read about it, but they don't want to reflect upon it for themselves. And same thing, the response was tremendous. And it really took the courage of Felicity Carter, who's the editor, to say, we need to talk about this because we're in a space of, we're talking about transparency. As an industry, we need to be more progressive on so many issues. And this is one of them that still carries a deep stigma. And I had the same response from a couple of people who wrote to me saying, thank goodness you're talking about this, giving me very concrete examples of behaviour that, were it in the public forum, it's pretty concerning, but there's still a great fear about bringing that out into the open. And so part of the objective with the whole platform for A Balanced Glass is to say, we're all in this together. We all need to be well. We deserve to be well. We need to demand from our employers that they help support us because, it's not an easy industry to stay healthful in.
Right. I think that's a really important point, Beck. And there are so many supplementary or peripheral topics that come up as a result, such as, talking about a somewhat, what seems like an uncomfortable topic that ends up being something that people really want to talk about, I mean, first and foremost, but then it brings up a whole lot of other things that I'm sure that you've seen, other problems in the workplace, other things that have sort of boiled up or simmered up as a result, or things like healthcare, or things like how do you take care of each other, and what's acceptable and what's appropriate.
Yeah, it's true. And I, to Cathy's point, I'm talking to a lot of people in the industry on the employer side, so the large employers that are really have the ability to make a difference and have the ability and the money and the resources to drive change. And some of it is being done informally, but it is very difficult to get this kind of information concrete so that we can start to give examples of best practice and inspire other people to take the same, at least look at a framework. When I work for Folio with Michael Mondavi, and since the 1970s, he's given every employee a breathalyzer, a personal breathalyzer, if you work in any form of promotion. And when Folio began in 2005, that was your onboarding kit. And then the decision's in your hands. If if you're working and you're consuming, it's your responsibility to manage your alcohol, but the support systems are there. You take a taxi, you get a hotel, or you have a car drive you home. You never take a risk. Now, if you choose to take a different approach, then, the consequences are you won't be with the company for much longer if you do not address, the behaviour that you have. But the point being that it puts the responsibility of that behaviour back in the employee's hands.
But it's also a corporate decision back, right? I mean, it's a corporate decision, and I think that's part of this topic as well. Is the responsibility of the established companies, of the big companies, to sort of set the model, who have the resources and who have the budget to address these kind of things head on and make the resources available head on for employees, and to sort of set a standard. And then for the smaller, mid-sized companies to do everything that they can, but to know that there are people kind of paving the way.
And restaurant workers need health care. I feel like we say this in every episode. Well, let's transition to our next course, which we've already kind of touched upon. The idea that the wine industry isn't actually that easy to work in. I think people have this idea that working in the wine industry is just this wonderful string of tasting events and dinners out. But Rebecca Hopkins, your website, A Balanced Glass, is really about addressing the strains and stresses that folks in the wine industry have to deal with. I mean, sometimes there can be too much of a good thing, right? Like too many late nights, too many winemaker dinners. It's not good for your health. I mean, we've been talking about mental health, but there are also physical ramifications, correct?
Yeah, Catherine, that's the big thing. And from the physical point of view, alcohol is not a subject to be taken lightly when you work in it for the long term. And I think certainly the difference between maybe hospitality and what we're talking about as a wine career is we're in a cumulative position. We're certainly not in the high intense pressure environments, but we're doing it every day. Every day you can be tasting wine at 9 a.m. and maybe putting down your last glass at midnight. And there is a very real physiology, epidemiology, physical impact of that behaviour. Now, the reality is we're all different. We're all built differently, our metabolism. So we metabolize alcohol differently, but the expectation is the same. And so that creates challenges and a great deal of self-discipline and self-awareness to manage that process. We also, you just touched on the amount of drinking and eating. The volume and the frequency of the types of foods that we're eating is a real challenge. And Hannah and Cathy, I'm sure, travel a great deal more than me, but you're traveling to a wine region and someone has spent a great deal of invested time to bring you there. They want to show you their best pork, their jamon iberico, their 15-layer lasagnas, and there's an expectation that you will eat it. And so, which is fine if we're doing that on vacation, but if you're traveling 200 days a year, it certainly starts to build up, and then part of it becomes lifestyle. It just becomes, you start on the coffee to get your digestion started in the morning, and you're off and running, and then you're putting down your last digestive at the end of the day.
Which is midnight or 1 a.m. and
1 a.m. and in Europe, 2 a.m. Mm-hmm. And the third part, I said that we have physiology and food and drink and then travel. And it's not necessarily just the long-haul travel, which of course has challenges with jet lag and body clocks and things. But, domestic salespeople are traveling 200 days a year. And they're not living in New York City and Chicago and the great, there's a lot of traveling to regional markets where food may not be available, healthy options. They may only be in a hotel room for 4 or 5 hours, and, they're constantly on the road, so they're not getting water. They're probably using things that are managing their adrenals, which, by the time they get home, I had a gentleman who's a very long tenure, 20 years in the wine business. He travels 150 days a year. He said his last trip he got home and cried in the car because he was so exhausted, but he didn't want to take that pressure home to his family. Because the other side of that is you get home from being on the road full of all these wonderful things and your partner, significant other says, let's go out for dinner. Right? You just want a smoothie and a big glass of water.
There's only so many Michelin 2-star restaurants you can go to, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Is that the idea?
A long-winded way of saying it, yes.
I was going to ask Hannah, what, and actually all of you, what is your sort of recalibration routine when you get home? Your recalibration, meal when you get home, or what do you do to just
for me, I just got back from vacation last night, so I can tell you it's fresh in my mind. Just doing a little yoga. I mean, because oftentimes that's the thing that slips is I usually do yoga like 3 or 4 times a week, and on vacation it's just harder to find the place. I don't travel with my mat, and then just eating a clean diet. So eating fruits, having a snack in the morning instead of a full breakfast. There's no pressure on you to try new things in a new place because you're home. So I can just kind of like have a day where I'm just like, oh, I'm going to have an apple with almond butter, or I'm going to have some, kimchi or.
Yeah, I just try to eat super healthfully anytime I'm at home, because I know the moment I'm out at a wine event, I'm going to be just consuming massive quantities of cheese and wine and paying the price later. And all of you, have you found, I found this is a problem in the industry where when you do come home, and I can't even complain because I'm just a journalist, but for these folks who are in sales, who are on the road constantly, they come home and their friends and family say, we don't feel sorry for you. You've been in France. You have nothing to complain about. And they're exhausted, and there's no one to talk to about that.
Yeah, this is Rebecca. That's very much true. And what you will often find is they'll find community within the industry. And so I think because the industry is small, there are a lot of people who are either in it or they're a +1 to so many events after a point of being out every single night, going to another black tie gala dinner with, fish, chicken and steak. There starts to be some recognition. But it's a major pain point within relationships. The people that have shared their stories with me have said, yeah, it's really difficult. And it's less about not feeling sorry for you. It's more the effect on your physical and your mental health of being on that expectation that people think it's so fun, so you actually can't be truthful about the times when it is a struggle. And that's certainly something that has been shared.
I think on the flip side of that too, Beck, and I don't know if you feel this, but I find that when I come home, no, I don't get a lot of sympathy, but I also find that I've gotten into the habit of compartmentalizing. So my travel was that, and now it's over, and now I'm here. I'm here with you. I'm here with my family. I'm home. I have kids, and now I'm 100% here. And that actually has that kind of compartmentalization has helped me to balance, to actually find some balance. Because when I'm gone, I'm really gone. And when I'm home, I'm really home.
And Cathy, aren't you a yoga instructor?
I have my yoga teacher training certificate, and I've been doing yoga for a heck of a long time. And I think that's one of the reasons why Beck wanted me to sort of provide the color commentary for a balance class, is because we counterbalance each other on that. Beck talks a lot about breath work, and I talk a lot about meditation.
So I'm hearing a common theme that we should all be doing yoga if we're
certainly after being on a flight. I mean, I always feel like my back is just messed up after sitting for so many hours. You sit at the airport, you sit getting to the airport, on the plane. Yeah, by the time you get back, I just want to be in a headstand or downward dog.
Get your heart above your head.
Yeah.
Yeah, get out of your head.
Yeah.
And just put the heart up first.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and this is Rebecca, and I think, Cathy, yoga tends to get an immediate bad rap from a lot of people in the industry because they say it's too hard, right? I've seen all those bendy people on Instagram, and it's not something for me. And so one of the really easy pieces that we did was on, jet lag is a killer for most of us. Mm-hmm. And so legs up the wall, which Cathy was just demonstrating in her way, is a great way to encourage sleep and to get your body, relaxed when you've come off a plane and you're stressed and, you've run to the hotel. And so a lot of our work is around giving things names that people aren't intimidated by and showing them that you're actually doing it. Like, you're doing yoga. It doesn't need to be on a mat in a class with a teacher. You can do it in an airport. You can do it standing in line. It's something that it's more a philosophy and a way of life, I think. And I even have yeah, I even have gentlemen who come up to me and be like, oh, I did a forward bend. Is that yoga? I'm like, yeah, you're doing it. And they're very proud of themselves.
Yeah. And I think also, Beck, one of your visions for a balance class was to have the tribe. And so every week you profile a different person in the industry, and not only profile them and sort of show everyone the diversity of the people who are practicing mindfulness and seeking balance within the industry, but you ask each of them every single week, what do you do to maintain balance while in this industry? And so we've kind of accumulated a really interesting set of responses, I think.
Yeah, we had Hannah profiled, goodness, 6 or 7 weeks ago. You're one of the first.
Yeah, I was honored.
Yeah, and
Catherine, you're next, by the way.
Yeah, Catherine, by the way, you're on notice.
Better start behaving.
Another thing that I've done, which wasn't part of that interview, but I just thought of it, is that just saying no sometimes. As a journalist, you get so many invitations to do press trips, to go out to dinner, to go to openings, and just, I have a stepdaughter who's with us half the time, and family obligations, as I'm sure you all do, and just that is very freeing to be like, you know what, there's no reason why I have to go to this. I'm not going to write about it. Probably, and I already have something like this night. I try to keep it to one event a week if I can. And even just, going on, press trips are kind of difficult, especially if they're wine press trips. I just can't keep up with those people. Yeah.
Well, Rebecca, I have to ask you about one of the posts I saw. It was digestion hacks for travelers. I'm always have a stomach ache from consuming too much wine and cheese, as I mentioned. What can I do? Help me.
You can do, that's the first thing you can do is be aware of what your body can tolerate. If you don't eat a lot of cheese, don't eat cheese because it's there. There's some simple basic knowledge. But one of the simplest things when you wake up in the morning, if you're traveling on the road, is hot water and lemon. Hot water and lemon, the first thing in the morning in your tummy, will stimulate your liver and your pancreas and get your digestive system started. And it sounds really silly, but it genuinely works.
It's also thousands and thousands of years old.
Yeah.
From the Ayurvedic tradition of medicine. Mm-hmm. I drink hot water constantly almost, especially when I'm traveling. And I don't even use the lemon. Yeah. Like, it's a little too citric for me. It's just hot water constantly.
And hot water, never iced water. Never put iced water in your system first thing in the morning because, again, your body it's just waking up. It's sluggish. Generally with travel or excess, it's a case of things slowing down, not a case of things being too fast. So we need things that will stimulate our endocrine and digestive system to get moving. The belly massage is something that we talk about a lot, but it's just physically massaging your stomach. It's more so your intestines and your large intestines, just to help your body get started in the morning. And that's why things like twists and bends, if you have a yoga practice, are really great to just physically stimulate your system. If you're not feeling well, stay away from stimulants. No coffee. Take a tea if you need the caffeine. No wine if you can help it. And as much water as you can take to help your system flush through whatever it is that, that you're dealing with. And, just you'll feel your body start to kind of recalibrate. And when I come home for travel, my dish that I eat, it's an Ayurvedic Indian dish called khichdi, and it's a very simple, easily digestible dish of mung bean and rice. And it's very easy to make, and it's considered in the Ayurvedic tradition to balance your body, balance your doshas, and bring your physical body back to what they call a sattvic state, or, an equilibrium. And so I eat that for a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
And it's so good. It's so good. I was at a pivot point when I was in between trips, and I was a guest at Beck's place, and she made this, and it does exactly that, and it's just no alcohol, and you just sort of recalibrate.
It sounds a bit like comfort food too.
Totally.
Wow. Well, I will definitely start drinking warm water every morning, and I'm going to have to check out the mung beans and start cooking those. Thank you. Thank you for those tips. It's time to move on to our third course. This episode is all about exploding stereotypes and promoting health for food and beverage professionals. But for our third course, let's consider the plight of the bartender. Hannah Wallace, we all think of bartenders as these kind of happy-go-lucky folks who get to hang out and basically party and shake cocktails for a living. But according to an article you published on the NBC Better blog, bartending is actually one of the most stressful jobs in the United States, it turns out. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it was interesting talking to people because, I had no idea that it was. Obviously, you stand for a long time, so it's not very good for your back or for your feet. But there's all these things that you don't realize are behind the bar. There's these things called the double rail, and then there's the speed rail. And apparently, you're constantly bumping into them. And so I interviewed this woman, bartender at the Delmonico in Las Vegas, and she said she has bruises all over her legs, her back just from all the stooping and the bending, much like waitressing. But even more so because there's these little fridges underneath and bottles of alcohol. Your back is really sore. And so she said she would even use the espresso machine when people weren't looking to kind of rub her back, the thing that pokes into, into the glass. So there's a lot of different, I interviewed some therapists and psychologists about things that you could do to try and counteract the stress. And so, again, yoga comes into play. Feet up the wall pose, very simple pose. You don't have to be a yogi to do it. I mean, after a long night of bartending, just lying there with your feet up the wall, literally, for as long as you can manage it to just counteract all that, the gravity of being on your feet all day long. I was a waitress only once, but in D.C., and I remember this gets back to the alcohol thing and why alcoholism is so prevalent in the bartending industry or hospitality industry. But you go out with your friends after work. Your shift gets off at midnight. One of the ways of coming down from that adrenaline is like, oh, let's go out for drinks, because if you're good, you haven't been drinking while you're on the job. And so we would go, this was when I was in college, we would just go out to some place that had, margarita pitchers, and it was like midnight, from midnight to 1, and then I worked in the morning at the National Governors Association, somehow, and I just can't imagine how bad that was for my health, and I know it was. So anyway, instead of doing that, coming home and doing a little yoga, something else to unwind that's more balanced.
I was looking at Jeffrey Morgenthaler's blog. He is a kind of a celebrity bartender and writer who is based here in Portland and has been on this podcast before. And he added that one of the stresses about bartending is that you want, first of all, your clientele often tends to be drunk. And so you have to kind of manage that. You have to be the police person. But you also genuinely want them to have a good time. As you were saying, Cathy, earlier, people get into hospitality because they want to please people. And so he was talking about sort of the tension between you want people to have a good time. You don't want them to have a bad impression of your place. But, you have to be the policeman. So, not only are you dealing with back pain and everything else that you're talking about, Hannah, but there's also this whole kind of psychological, sociological stress that's going on. And he talked about like when you have to cut people off, you really have to think about strategies, ways that you can kind of stay friends with your customers.
And then add in sexual harassment to that too, which is another element. If you're a female, even some male bartenders, but if you're a female bartender, you're maybe getting hit on by the drunk customer.
Yeah.
So you have to manage that in a way, that isn't going to piss the person off so they never come back, or maybe you want to piss them off so they never come back. But in general, in hospitality, you don't want to do that. So there's got to be some way that your staff members can help. And it's a complicated issue. But I think people are getting better about, as we're talking about all these issues in the industry, like what are ways that you can intervene? Can you I did a story for 750 Daily about sexual harassment, actually, so that kind of overlaps. And if you drop your keys, like if you can, or like if you're the bartender and you can push the person's keys on the floor, and then they have something to do, so you can make eye contact with the woman next to him and say, hey, are you okay? Without that person noticing that you did because they're picking up their keys from the floor, stuff like that. There's just some ways to check in with either your colleagues at the bar or the person at the bar who's being harassed to see if they're wanting your help.
Wow. That's so much going on.
That's so important. I'm so glad that you're writing about that, Hannah. Seriously, because I think that the harassment piece was amazing, and I think the idea of confrontation. What have we just been talking about? Like lots of high alcohol environment, high adrenaline environment, and I've got to confront somebody who's probably being fairly, vocal or aggressive in some way. The more like how do you do that? If you're the kind of training, I think, and just awareness that the more we can get out there.
There was an example from a bar here in Portland in that story, and I think what happened was she just told her male colleagues and said, look, this guy's bugging me and I feel really uncomfortable around him. And they just very kindly but firmly told him, we don't want you to come back for a while because we've had complaints from various staff members. He didn't isolate who it was who made the complaint, of course, but I think that's what you have to do. You have to, have the backs of the people you're working with.
Which goes right back to Beck's original point about the tribe, right? Like, we're in this together.
Yeah.
Like, you're a coworker. We're in the weeds here. We're going through this battle together.
Exactly. Yep.
I thought Jeffrey Morgenthaler had some good tips for dealing with some of these people so they don't get violent or, outraged. Just kind of kill them with kindness. Start by offering them a coffee or some food if you can swing, offering some food from the kitchen for free. Offer them a free drink the next time they come in if you feel like you have to cut them off. And he said, even go so far as to offer to pay for a taxi home. So just, kind of nicely say, I don't think you're your usual self right now, and I want to help you out, and I want you to come back and be a good customer, but tonight's just not your night.
Those are good tips.
Yeah.
I think we also have similar challenges for wine-only bars. And sometimes I think the bartender moniker is given, for people pouring liquor cocktail-based environments. But certainly we see it. I mean, I live in San Francisco, and so we have a very heavy wine-only bar culture. And there is that kind of excessive consumption that behavior just switches quite quickly. And it is a difficult situation to take yourself out of because the community is really small. And to Cathy's point, part of the reason of building a tribe is so that we can be really honest with each other and give ourselves something to come together to talk about so that we can broaden the discussion about, maybe what else is going on. Because there are certain people who operate within the business that have challenges that, with alcohol or with excess. And so, part of what came up last week in the column for A Balanced Glass was from Irene, who was an Italian guest contributor, talking about, someone pulling her aside and saying, hey, I need your help right now to pull me out of this situation, because it takes a lot of trust. And I think that that's a big part of it. As an industry, we need to really be prepared to trust each other when we're not dealing with things or when we're in situations, but also be prepared to be there for each other if someone else is facing something. I just came from TechSom yesterday. And
for those who don't know what TechSom is, can you quickly tell us?
Sure, my apologies. So TechSom it's a 15-year-old conference. Its primary principle is really to improve the excellence of service, as in wine service and education for American wine professionals working mostly in restaurants and in on-premise outlets. And it's very much an educational platform. And because of that nature, there's a lot of either young in career or in age, people working in these environments. And very happily, probably 40% of the audience this year was young women, which is fantastic to see. It's very encouraging. It's certainly, we've come a long way. But they're going back to their restaurants in parts of America where maybe they don't have support systems that they might have had. And TechSom gives them an opportunity, because the conference is intimate in nature and incredibly inclusive, that they can learn and listen from each other so that they can then take that education back to their establishments, whether that's best case, that are being used in bigger cities or in more established restaurant groups, but empowering them with knowledge so that behaviour like this can really start to change, because it really comes down to the industry having a cultural evolution in a lot of ways, that we do start to draw really, much stronger boundaries for ourselves, but for the people that, we're really responsible for bringing up through the industry.
Yeah. Well, I just want to end this segment on a light note, which is, I guess it's a light note. I'm working on an article right now for 750 Daily about nightmare horror stories from winery tasting rooms. And it turns out that not everyone, but a lot of people think they can just drink too much wine in a winery tasting room and misbehave. And I'm sort of laughing as I'm going through all the input I've gotten from all these folks who pour in tasting rooms who've had people just feel free to get naked and steal things. And
what?
I mean, it's just a lot of accidental drinking from the spit bucket. It's just, it's quite, I think people just kind of lose themselves when they get around too much alcohol, and it's a danger in the industry for those of us who work.
I've never seen that at a tasting room. I'll be really interested to read your story.
Yeah,
everyone's on their best behavior. And
I've been that tasting room assistant in Australia in the early 90s, and I can completely identify with a lot of those stories. People, they either get carried away because it's birthday, anniversary, celebration, therefore sometimes the liberties just go a little far. We used to do a little discouragement of people in award prizes, if they got in there, go and sit down in the corner for 5 minutes, almost kind of like a timeout.
Wow.
To encourage them, just like put your pants on and go and sit in the corner and hear some coffee. So I want to read your article too.
You're supposed to taste and spit, people. It's all about tasting. It's not about consuming. Oh, well. Well, sadly, our time is up, and it's time to move on to our dessert course, where we go around the table and each share something food or beverage related we have been enjoying this week. Mine is sort of amorphous. It's just, every time I read a novel by an accomplished novelist, I'm always blown away by the food and beverage descriptions, and I think I just feel so like I'm so inadequate as a beverage writer because novelists can do it so much better. I'm just finishing a novel called The Female Persuasion by Meg Wolitzer, and she has so many great food descriptions. There's a moment when a character who's a vegetarian has to eat a steak, and it still sticks with me. But the one thing that kind of connects to this episode that I really loved was one of the characters is a drug addict and then gets clean and kind of finds redemption as a sous chef. So that part of the story made me very happy.
It was such a great book. I was actually I was thinking about mentioning that.
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
But yeah, so ditto.
Yeah.
Ditto to that. Absolutely.
Well, what's your dessert, Cathy?
So I have to say 2 wine regions that I have have gotten on my radar. So one is I recently attended Australia Decanted, which was an unbelievable off-the-hook event, and just learned so much more about this entire continent and the wine industry there that I just feel like I wrote an article about how the U.S. industry is lazy about staying up to date about places like this. But then also just 2 days ago, I returned from Mexico, and I was judging a competition there and got a really amazing bird's eye view of everything that's going on in the Mexican wine industry. And just, the sommelier community there is, especially in Mexico City, is really, really something and emerging and something to watch out for.
Yeah, I wish we could get more Mexican wines up here because when I've been there, I've tasted some beautiful wines. And historic vineyards, very historic vineyards.
I think the oldest vineyard in the Western Hemisphere is in Mexico.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Rebecca, did you bring a dessert item?
I did. I brought 2 because I quite like dessert. My first is in the Texom theme. The book of all Italian books is by Dr. Ian D'Agata, who is an Italian expert on grape varieties. He has the most encyclopedic knowledge of Italian wine, Italian grapes. Certainly in all the reading that I've done. His book is called Native Wine Grapes of Italy. It's actually available through Powell's City of Books here in Portland. I'm always a big local bookstore supporter. And if you want to learn anything about Italian grapes, this is your book. The second one is, Cathy mentioned earlier, but I have a huge focus on breath and breathing, and breath is something that we often run out of when we get stressed. There's a great app on iTunes. It's free. It's called The Breathing App. It's that simple. It was developed by a New York Ashtanga teacher called Eddie Stern in conjunction with Deepak Chopra, and the soundtrack is by Moby. It's a really simple, you set your time, you set your cadence, and it helps you to focus on your breath. You can do it on the bus, in the subway. Probably don't do it when you're driving the kids to school, but it's a way that you can just kind of reconnect to your body.
I should do that before we start taping the podcast. Wonderful. Thank you. How about you, Hannah?
Well, since the last time I was on the Foretop, I actually pitched and wrote an article for 750 Daily about wines that have a smoky element to them because of the conversation we had. And there's actually a number of Oregon winemakers who are making what I think are pretty delicious wines that were flavored with smoky grapes. I'm not going to use the word smoke taint.
Smoky from wildfires.
From the wildfires, yeah. And actually getting in last night to the Portland airport, it was so smoky here and still is today. And down in Ashland last week where I was, the plays were canceled because of smoke. So I just kept thinking of what Nate Reddy, who's a winemaker here in Oregon, had told me for that article, which is that we should get used to this because this is the flavor, part of the flavor of wines of the West, because we are not going to, this is not going to stop happening with global warming. And right now I think there's maybe 15 or 20 fires happening in the West right now in Washington and Oregon and Southern California, in LA. And so, so the one that I really liked on the positive side was Strawberry Mullet by Michael Garofalo. He has a new label called Cutter Cascadia. I don't know if you've had a chance to try it, but it's a really cute bottle. It's very, very small production. Probably can only buy it here in Oregon, but it's available at Dana Frank's new wine bar, Bar Norman, if you want to try it by the glass. And I think at OK Omens, too.
And Dana was just on
good.
the most recent episode,
great.
so I like the synergy there.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, Cathy and Rebecca, that you came to visit Portland during wildfire season. Come back when we have a better view for you and better air.
It's a date.
It's a date.
Well, special thanks to all you panelists. Cathy Huyghe, a journalist for Forbes Online and Inc.com, a contributor to A Balanced Glass, and founder of Enolytics.com. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Catherine.
And Rebecca Hopkins, a wine communication strategist, wine writer, and founder of the website A Balanced Glass. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Catherine.
And Hannah Wallace, a journalist covering food, wine, and agriculture for many publications, including 750 Daily, which we've mentioned a lot today, and I love it because I'm a contributing editor there, so I love the log rolling. Thank you. Today's episode was recorded in the high-fiber, protein-packed city of Portland, Oregon, in the studios of OPB. Thank you to Nalene Silva for being our sound tech today. Sound supervisor Stephen Cray will be back with our next episode. Our editor is Alex Ward. Our assistant producer is Izzy Kramer. And our theme music was performed by the incomparable wine importer Kermit Lynch. You can read all about our episodes on the OPB website, and you can also visit our brand new dedicated website at thefourtop.org. We would love it if you would donate to our James Beard Award-winning show. You can do that at our website. I'll just say one more time, thefourtop.org. But you can also just help us out by rating us on iTunes or subscribing on your favorite podcast app, or even just tweeting us, posting on our Facebook page or Instagram feed. However you get in touch, we do want to hear from you. Thank you for listening, and bye-bye.
Nuit blanche, nuit blanche, nuit blanche.